In the harsh winter of 1847, deep in the untamed territories of what would one day become Montana, a 12-year-old orphan boy named Samuel Creek trudged through knee-deep snow, his threadbare boots leaving crimson stains in the white expanse. The boy had been walking for 3 days straight, fleeing from the cruel hands of his latest guardian who had beaten him senseless for spilling a bucket of milk. His ribs ached with each labored breath, and his fingers had long since lost feeling in the bitter cold that cut through the Wyoming mountains like a blade forged in hell itself. Samuel had nothing left in this world except the tattered wool coat on his back, a gift from his deceased mother, and a stubborn will to survive that burned brighter than any campfire. As darkness began to swallow the landscape, he stumbled upon something that would change not just his life, but the entire course of history in these wild lands. There, abandoned beneath a cluster of frost-covered pine trees, lay a small bundle wrapped in what appeared to be animal hide. The bundle was moving, and from within came the faintest cry of an infant. The boy's heart nearly stopped when he unwrapped the hide and discovered a Native American baby, no more than a few months old, with skin blue from the cold and lips that had already begun to turn purple. Without hesitation, Samuel stripped off his precious coat, the only thing keeping him from freezing to death, and wrapped it around the tiny child. He pressed the baby against his chest, sharing what little body heat he had left, and began searching desperately for shelter as the temperature plummeted and the first flakes of a deadly blizzard began to fall. Through sheer luck or divine intervention, Samuel spotted the dim outline of an abandoned barn in the distance, its roof partially collapsed but its walls still standing strong against the howling wind. He ran as fast as his frozen legs could carry him, clutching the native baby tightly, and burst through the barn door just as the storm unleashed its full fury upon the land. Inside the barn, he found remnants of old hay and broken farming equipment left behind by some long-departed settler. Samuel gathered every scrap of dry material he could find and built a small nest in the corner, placing the baby at its center and curling his own body around the child like a human shield against the cold. What Samuel didn't know was that he was being watched. High up in the surrounding hills, 30 Lakota warriors had been tracking the missing child for 2 days, following a trail that had grown fainter with each passing hour. The baby belonged to Chief Standing Bear's youngest daughter, who had died in childbirth just 3 months earlier. The infant, named Little Thunder, was the chief's only remaining connection to his beloved daughter, and losing the child would mean losing the last piece of his heart. The warriors had been ready to give up their search when they saw the strange sight of a white boy carrying their missing child toward the abandoned barn. Through the scope of an old military spyglass, War Eagle, the chief's most trusted scout, watched in amazement as the orphan boy sacrificed his own coat to keep Little Thunder warm. This act of selfless compassion from a white child toward a native infant was unlike anything the warriors had ever witnessed, especially during these times of brutal conflict between their people and the encroaching settlers. As the night deepened and the blizzard raged with increasing violence, the 30 warriors made a decision that would echo through generations. Instead of storming the barn to reclaim their child, they began lighting fires in a perfect circle around the structure, creating a wall of warmth and light that would protect both the white boy and the native baby from the killing cold. Each warrior stood guard at his fire, feeding it throughout the night, their faces painted with the ancient symbols of protection and honor. Inside the barn, Samuel noticed the orange glow beginning to seep through the gaps in the wooden walls. At first, he feared he was surrounded by hostile forces who meant to burn him alive, but as the hours passed and the temperature inside the barn began to rise, he realized something extraordinary was happening. These mysterious fires weren't meant to harm him, they were meant to save him. The warmth allowed Little Thunder to stop shivering, and for the first time since Samuel had found the baby, the child's breathing became steady and strong. But the story was far more complex than either Samuel or the warriors initially understood. Earlier that morning, before Samuel had discovered the baby, a group of rogue cavalry soldiers led by the notorious Captain Jeremiah Blackwood had raided the Lakota village, killing several women and children in their quest to steal horses and supplies. During the chaos, Little Thunder had been accidentally separated from the fleeing villagers when his cradle board became entangled in thick brush near the river. Captain Blackwood was a man consumed by hatred for all native peoples, driven to madness by the death of his own family in a completely unrelated raid years earlier. He had been tracking the Lakota band for weeks, planning to wipe them out entirely and claim their fertile hunting grounds for white settlement. What Blackwood didn't know was that his brutal attack had scattered the very people he was trying to destroy, making them nearly impossible to find in the vast wilderness. The 30 warriors surrounding Samuel's barn were not just any warriors. They were the survivors of Blackwood's morning raid, men who had lost wives, children, and brothers to the captain's unprovoked violence. They had been searching for Little Thunder not just as a rescue mission, but as their final act before declaring total war on every white settlement within 100 miles. The discovery of a white child protecting their baby with his own life had stopped them in their tracks, forcing them to reconsider everything they thought they knew about their enemies. As dawn approached, War Eagle approached the barn alone, his weapons deliberately left behind with his horse. Samuel heard the footsteps crunching through the snow and held Little Thunder closer, prepared to die protecting the child he had come to love during their long night together. When the barn door creaked open and the tall Lakota warrior stepped inside, Samuel expected to see death in the man's eyes. Instead, he saw something that confused and amazed him, tears streaming down the warrior's weathered cheeks. War Eagle spoke no English, but his gestures were clear as he pointed to Little Thunder, then to his own chest, then to the boy. Through a combination of hand signals and broken words picked up from trading posts, War Eagle managed to communicate that the baby was his grandson, the child of his daughter who had died bringing Little Thunder into the world. The warrior's gratitude was overwhelming as he realized this white orphan had risked his own life to save the most precious thing in War Eagle's world. The reunion between grandfather and grandchild was interrupted by the sound of approaching horses, dozens of them, thundering across the frozen plain toward the barn. Captain Blackwood had finally picked up the trail of the scattered Lakota warriors, and he was leading a force of 40 cavalry soldiers in what he believed would be the final battle to eliminate the native threat in the territory. Blackwood had no idea that he was about to ride into a trap that had been 30 warriors strong all night long. What happened next would become legend among both the Lakota people and the white settlers of the region. As Blackwood's cavalry charged toward the barn, expecting to find a handful of hiding Indians, they instead found themselves surrounded by a perfectly coordinated ring of fire and steel. The 30 warriors had used the cover of darkness and the distraction of their protective fires to position themselves in an unbreakable circle of defense. When the soldiers realized they were outnumbered and outmaneuvered, panic set in among their ranks. But Captain Blackwood was beyond reason, beyond strategy, beyond any hope of survival. In his madness, he spurred his horse directly toward the barn where he could see the silhouettes of War Eagle and Samuel through the doorway. Blackwood raised his saber high above his head, screaming a battle cry that echoed across the frozen landscape, determined to kill everyone inside the structure, regardless of the consequences to himself or his men. War Eagle stepped protectively in front of Samuel and Little Thunder, preparing to face death with honor. But Samuel had other plans. The orphan boy had noticed something during his night in the barn that the warrior had missed, a detail that would save all their lives. Hidden beneath the old hay and broken equipment, Samuel had discovered a cache of dynamite left behind by miners who had used the barn as a temporary storage facility months earlier. In the few seconds before Blackwood reached the barn door, Samuel grabbed one of the dynamite sticks and the oil lamp War Eagle had brought with him, creating a makeshift explosive device that he hurled directly at the captain's charging horse. The explosion knocked Blackwood from his saddle and sent his terrified mount galloping back toward his own men, creating chaos in the cavalry ranks and giving the Lakota warriors the perfect opportunity to strike. The battle that followed lasted less than 10 minutes, but its consequences would reshape the entire region for decades to come. The surviving cavalry soldiers, demoralized by their captain's defeat and surrounded by superior forces, surrendered without further bloodshed. But more importantly, the alliance formed that night between Samuel Creek and the Lakota warriors would grow into something much larger, a bridge of understanding between two peoples who had been taught to hate each other. War Eagle adopted Samuel as his own grandson, giving him the name Fire Walker in honor of his brave actions during the Night of the 30 Fires. Samuel learned the Lakota language and customs while teaching English and reading skills to the younger warriors. He became a translator, a mediator, and eventually a respected leader in both communities, helping to establish the first successful treaties between the Lakota Nation and the territorial government. Little Thunder grew up knowing that his life had been saved by a white brother who loved him enough to sacrifice everything, and this knowledge shaped him into a powerful advocate for peace between the races. As an adult, Little Thunder became a renowned chief who led his people through some of the most difficult negotiations in Native American history, always remembering the lesson he learned as a baby wrapped in Samuel's coat that a person's heart mattered more than the color of their skin. The abandoned barn where Samuel and Little Thunder spent their crucial night together was transformed into a sacred site for both communities, with families from miles around making pilgrimages to honor the memory of the 30 warriors who chose protection over revenge. Every winter on the anniversary of that legendary night, descendants of both Samuel and Little Thunder would gather at the barn to light 30 fires in a circle, sharing stories and strengthening bonds that had been forged in the crucible of compassion and mutual respect. But the most remarkable part of this story wasn't discovered until many years later, when Samuel as an adult was sorting through his mother's few possessions that he had carried with him since childhood. Hidden in the lining of his precious coat, the same coat he had used to save Little Thunder's life, Samuel found a letter written in his mother's hand. The letter revealed that Samuel's father had been a Lakota warrior named Running Wolf, who had fallen in love with Samuel's mother during a brief period of peace between their peoples. Samuel wasn't just a white orphan who had saved a native child. He was actually half Lakota himself, which explained the instant connection he had felt with Little Thunder and the natural ease with which he had been accepted into War Eagle's family. This revelation meant that Samuel's act of sacrifice hadn't been random kindness from a stranger. It had been the actions of a brother protecting his nephew, guided by blood ties that transcended the artificial boundaries created by fear and prejudice. The 30 fires that had burned around the barn that night hadn't just protected 2 children from the cold. They had illuminated a truth that would bring healing to an entire region torn apart by violence and misunderstanding. The legacy of that winter night in 1847 extended far beyond the personal stories of Samuel and Little Thunder. Their friendship and the alliance forged by the 30 warriors became the foundation for the first successful integrated community in the Montana Territory, a place where white settlers and Native Americans lived and worked together as equals. This community, known as Fire Circle, became a model for peaceful coexistence that attracted families from across the country who were tired of the endless cycle of violence and retribution that characterized most of the frontier. Samuel Creek, the orphan boy who had walked through the snow with nothing but a coat and an indomitable spirit, lived to see his integrated community grow into a thriving town of over 2,000 people. He married a Lakota woman named Morning Star and raised 6 children who carried the blood of both peoples in their veins. His descendants became teachers, doctors, lawyers, and leaders who continued his work of building bridges between communities that had been taught to see each other as enemies. Little Thunder, the baby whose life had been saved by Samuel's sacrifice, became one of the most respected chiefs in Native American history, known for his wisdom in negotiation and his unwavering commitment to peaceful solutions. He established the first Native American school that welcomed children of all races, and his treaties with the federal government served as models for fair and honorable agreements that actually benefited both sides rather than simply taking advantage of Native peoples. The barn where it all began still stands today, preserved as a historical monument and a reminder that individual acts of courage and compassion can change the course of history. Visitors from around the world come to see the place where 30 warriors chose to light fires of protection rather than fires of war, where an orphan boy proved that love knows no boundaries of race or culture, and where 2 children began a friendship that would heal the wounds of generations. The years passed like seasons changing over the Montana plains, each one adding new layers to the legend that had begun with 30 fires burning in the darkness. As Samuel Creek entered his final years, he would often sit on the porch of his log cabin overlooking the thriving community of Fire Circle, watching children of all backgrounds playing together in the streets below. His weathered hands, now marked by decades of honest work and countless handshakes between former enemies, would trace the scars on his chest left by that brutal winter night so long ago. Little Thunder, now an elderly chief with silver hair braided with eagle feathers earned through a lifetime of honorable deeds, would visit Samuel every Sunday after the community gathering where all faiths and traditions were welcomed under one roof. The 2 old men, one white and one Lakota, would sit in comfortable silence, sharing tobacco and memories of the night that had bound their souls together as surely as blood brothers. Sometimes they would speak of War Eagle, who had passed into the spirit world 10 years earlier, still believing until his last breath that the Great Spirit had guided Samuel to his grandson on that fateful winter evening. The impact of their story had spread far beyond the boundaries of Fire Circle. Newspapers from New York to San Francisco had carried accounts of the integrated community where peace had replaced violence, where cooperation had conquered conflict. Politicians and religious leaders made pilgrimages to see this miracle of coexistence with their own eyes, hoping to learn the secret that had allowed two warring peoples to find common ground in the harsh wilderness of the American frontier. But Samuel and Little Thunder knew the secret wasn't complicated or mystical. It was simply the recognition that love is stronger than fear, that compassion can overcome hatred, and that sometimes the most powerful thing one person can do for another is to share their coat on a cold night. They had built their entire community on this simple foundation, and it had proven strong enough to withstand every challenge that had come their way over the decades. The children and grandchildren of the original 30 warriors had grown up playing alongside the descendants of white settlers, creating friendships that their ancestors could never have imagined. These young people, raised without the prejudices that had divided their parents' generation, became living proof that racial harmony wasn't just a noble dream but an achievable reality. They intermarried freely, creating families that represented the best of both cultures, and their children grew up speaking both English and Lakota as naturally as they breathed the mountain air. Samuel's own children had followed in his footsteps as bridge builders and peacekeepers. His eldest son, David Fire Walker Creek, became the first person of mixed Lakota and white heritage to serve as a territorial judge, using his position to ensure fair treatment for all people regardless of their background. His daughter, Sarah Morning Creek, established a network of schools throughout the territory that taught both traditional Native American wisdom and modern academic subjects, creating the first truly multicultural education system in the American West. Little Thunder's descendants had also carried forward the legacy of that miraculous night. His son, Thomas Little Thunder, became a renowned diplomat who negotiated treaties that were actually honored by the federal government, something that had been virtually impossible before the example set by Fire Circle proved that mutual respect and understanding could create lasting agreements. His daughter, Rebecca Thunder Creek, married Samuel's youngest son and became a celebrated author whose books about frontier life and racial reconciliation were read throughout America and Europe. As the 19th century drew to a close, Samuel and Little Thunder began to understand that their time on Earth was nearing its end. Both men were now in their 70s, their bodies worn down by decades of hard work and the harsh climate of the frontier, but their spirits remained as strong as they had been on that long-ago night when an orphan boy had wrapped a native baby in his only coat. They decided together that their final act should be to ensure that the story of the 30 Fires would never be forgotten, that future generations would understand how their community had been born from an act of selfless love. They worked with the territorial government to establish the Fire Circle Museum, housed in a building constructed around the original barn where their lives had first intersected. The museum contained artifacts from both cultures, documents chronicling the growth of their integrated community, and most importantly, the actual coat that Samuel had used to save Little Thunder's life. The wool fabric was threadbare now, stained and patched from years of hard use, but it remained the most treasured exhibit in the entire collection, a tangible reminder of the moment when compassion had triumphed over circumstance. The museum's centerpiece was a large circular room with 30 windows, each one positioned to mark the exact location where one of the Lakota warriors had maintained his protective fire on that legendary night. Visitors could stand in the center of the room and imagine themselves surrounded by the warm glow of those flames, protected by the courage and dedication of men who had chosen love over revenge, hope over despair. The room was designed so that on the anniversary of the rescue, the setting sun would shine through all 30 windows simultaneously, creating a spectacular display of light that never failed to move observers to tears. Samuel Creek passed away peacefully in his sleep on a snowy February morning in 1899, exactly 52 years after the night he had found Little Thunder in the wilderness. His funeral was attended by over 5,000 people, including government officials, religious leaders, and representatives from a dozen different Native American tribes. They came not just to mourn the passing of a remarkable man, but to celebrate the life of someone who had proven that individual actions could change the course of history. Little Thunder followed his adopted brother into the spirit world just 6 months later, as if he could not bear to remain in the physical realm without his closest friend and companion. His funeral was equally well attended, and the eulogies spoke not just of his accomplishments as a chief and diplomat, but of the baby who had been saved by the love of a white orphan and had grown up to save countless others through his example of forgiveness and reconciliation. The two funerals were held in the same cemetery, on a hill overlooking Fire Circle, where their graves were placed side by side beneath a monument crafted by artisans from both communities. The monument depicted two children, one white and one Native American, sharing a single coat while 30 fires burned in a circle around them. The inscription, written in both English and Lakota, read simply, "Here lie Samuel Fire Walker Creek and Thomas Little Thunder, brothers not by blood but by choice, who taught us that love knows no boundaries." On the night after Little Thunder's funeral, something extraordinary happened that was witnessed by hundreds of people throughout Fire Circle. As darkness fell over the cemetery, 30 small lights appeared in a perfect circle around the monument, glowing softly like distant campfires. No one could explain the phenomenon, and it lasted only a few minutes before fading away, but everyone who saw it understood its meaning. The 30 warriors who had protected two children on a frozen night in 1847 had returned one final time to welcome their charges into the eternal circle of light. Today, more than a century and a half after that legendary night, Fire Circle remains a thriving community where people of all backgrounds live and work together in harmony. The town has grown into a small city of nearly 50,000 residents, but it has never lost the spirit of cooperation and mutual respect that was kindled by an orphan boy's act of selfless love. The annual Festival of 30 Fires draws visitors from around the world, all coming to witness the lighting of the ceremonial fires and to remember the lesson that a single moment of compassion can echo through generations. The story of Samuel Creek and Little Thunder has been told and retold countless times, inspiring books, movies, songs, and works of art that have carried their message to every corner of the globe. But perhaps the most powerful testament to their legacy is not found in any museum or monument, but in the faces of the children who play together in the streets of Fire Circle today, children who grow up believing that differences in appearance or culture are not obstacles to friendship but opportunities for learning and growth. In the end, the true miracle of that winter night in 1847 was not that 30 warriors chose to light fires of protection rather than fires of war, though that was remarkable enough. The true miracle was that their decision, inspired by the selfless courage of one orphan boy, proved that the human capacity for love and compassion is stronger than any force of hatred or division. Samuel Creek may have given up his coat to save one Native American baby, but in doing so, he wrapped an entire community in the warmth of understanding that continues to burn bright more than 170 years later. And somewhere in the Montana mountains, on cold winter nights when the snow falls heavy and the wind howls through the pines, travelers still report seeing the distant glow of 30 fires burning in a perfect circle, a reminder that love never dies and that the spirit of brotherhood that began with an orphan's coat will warm hearts for generations yet to come.